Hi, this is Jim Peters with Peters Principles, and you never know who you're going to have on Peters Principles. And today we have former school committeeman and my good friend from old high school, Dave Conway. Dave, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, Jimmy. Good to see you. Nice to be here. Thank you for putting that invitation out to me.
Oh, I wouldn't have thought of not doing it. So, one question that comes to mind that you're going to have to deal with if you get on the city council is the opioid crisis.
Right.
Today in the Sun, they said that some parents are dying, leaving the kids to be raised by their grandparents.
Yeah.
And that's happening not frequently, but more than they would want to see. How would you treat the opioid crisis, and what would you do to facilitate?
Well, I think that it obviously, we're not going to solve the problem here today. This has been going on now for quite a while. It's getting worse, and I think that if you take a look at it, there are a few things that I think we can support, and that is the fact that it's an addiction. People need help. I think we have to take a look at our resources on all levels, whether it's the city or the state or the federal, and we do have to put monies in there. Education alone is not going to be enough, but I think we also have to have these facilities in there, so that as many facilities as we can possibly afford. But I think that it's something that, needless to say, is not going to go away, and we have to face it head on. I think also when you take a look at the different types of insurances, we can lobby again on all different levels. Whether we do contracts on the city level, we should be able to put that into our contract for municipal employees, that it becomes a little bit easier and perhaps more efficient, and make the healthcare perhaps more effective, if at all possible, so that it will welcome people that do have this kind of an addiction, and it can help them out. And again, I think we need to do that on the state level and the federal level, because they can't solve the problems themselves, and by putting them into jail is not the answer either. I think also what we have to do is take a look at who's doing the selling, the hot spots in the city. And I think that we have to zero in on those hot spots, and we have to make sure that we clean up the situation. It's as simple as that, because we have to look at the source. If there's no source, it certainly cuts down on the problem, and if the source is abundant, that needless to say magnifies the problem. So there's a few things that can be done. And again, I think it's one of those situations that we're just going to have to fight it and fight it. It's an ongoing situation.
I don't see it as coming clean anytime soon. So
I don't think there's it's not an easy fix for something like this. It's going to take the work of everyone coming to the table. And again, when you take a look at the courts, the courts. By taking them and throwing them in jail isn't necessarily the answer. We need to have places for these people to get the help that they need, and hopefully be on the straight and narrow and become productive citizens once again. And by the way, it can hit anybody. It doesn't matter what age, what background, what race, creed. It goes across the lines. It doesn't matter whether it's in urban or suburban or rural. It is a difficult situation.
Well, fentanyl is the thing that scares me the most, because that's the drug that they say is making the rest of the drugs look good.
Right.
So they put it in heroin supposedly, and I don't know that much about it, but that just strikes me as being something that we've got to
Well, I think also when you take a look at, you've got to bring the hospitals into it and work with the hospitals, because you find that many of these doctors have oversubscribed. And the fact is, some of this medication, you have no idea how it's going to affect the body. I had about 8 years ago, I had an osteotomy done on my left leg. And they gave me, I think it was OxyContin, and it was absolutely horrible. It was horrible. And my wife immediately the next morning called the doctor and said, "You need to take him off this. He can't handle it." I was having a very difficult time. So again, it helps some people, other people it does not help. But I think that sometimes there's not sometimes, many times it's over subscribing too.
Yeah, I had a situation with an operation a couple of years ago, and when I was staying in the hospital, they put the painkiller on a bulb
Pump. Yes.
And
When you needed it,
when you needed it, but I didn't quite realize that it was a when you needed it type of situation. Right. So I over-medicated myself by accident. And,
right.
And it can be pretty scary.
Absolutely.
So, what do you see the police, the role of the police in Lowell, in terms of, we've had a pretty good year in terms of not having a lot of murders and.
Well, it's funny when you talk about public safety. Is this what you
well, this is my way to get into public safety. Right. Yes.
Yeah, because I think what public safety is that back a few years ago, and I don't know if you remember, Jimmy, we used to have what they call a safety task force. And when I was a housemaster over at Lowell High School, excuse me, we used to meet. I believe it was every Monday morning, and we'd have the police there. You would have somebody perhaps from the gang unit. You would have administrators there. You would also have SRO, you'd have the police. You might have somebody from the courts. It would be a whole variety of resources that would be put at the table. And the whole purpose of this was, and it only lasted about 45 minutes to an hour, and what took place there was the exchange of ideas. In other words, we said, where were the hot spots? Where were the problems in the city over the weekend? And that's what we worked on. And we found out that because of the exchange of ideas, it certainly helped to curtail many of the problems that were in the schools, and of course that spilled over into the streets, into the city. So it was a great program. It faded away. Back 2 years ago, I asked to bring it forward again, and I was told that the schools are safe. And that we didn't need it, but I still kept on pushing it. And the fact is, once you say that it's safe enough, then that's the mistake, because it should never be safe enough. You should always be looking for new ways to make the city, make the schools safer places. It's as simple as that. So that is one thing that if I get elected, I am definitely going to push again to make sure that the safety task force is put forward and it's utilized on a regular basis, on a weekly basis. I talked to a number of police officers, and I sought their advice, because I think what's important too, and the way I have always worked, Jimmy, throughout my entire career, was you don't have to know all the answers. You just have to know where to get them. And I bring people to the table that know more than I do, and there's nothing wrong with that, because I think that's a smart way of doing business. That's the way a good administrator would work. And I've talked to a number of police officers, and they discussed there was a program, and it was called the Crime Stoppers hotline, and they mentioned to me that it was extremely effective in curtailing and helping stop crime in the city. And what happened to it? It's still on the books. So if I mention it now, one of my opponents or somebody from the administration will say, "Oh no, no, we already have that in place." Yeah, it might be in place, but it's not utilized to its fullest extent at all. Because again, I heard it from the people that know, the people that are right there, and I believe them. So I think that would be another thing that I'd want to really push for the safety, for the public safety, is to make sure that programs like the Crime Stoppers Hotline and the Safety Task Force are put forward, put on the table, and utilized the way it's supposed to, so that we can make our city, we can make our streets, our schools safer. Period. And that's something that it's an ongoing situation, and we need to work on that constantly update, because you know what, the bad guys are always working too. They work overtime.
I wanted to ask you about your campaign a couple of years ago. You only missed by a couple hundred votes, right?
Correct.
Right. So you were very close to being elected, and what are you going to do differently this time that you didn't do last time then?
Well, I think it's a completely different election. As we said before we even started, the hot topic, naturally, it's on everyone's mind. That's the first thing that's usually said, and that is the high school.
Right.
And that's something that I came out right from the very beginning. It's very dear to me. I really, to be honest with you, I wasn't going to run. And then when I found out exactly what was going on, I found out that when I watched the way this was approached, the way this unfolded by the administration, I found that it was a complete debacle, to be quite frank with you, because it seems as though people really didn't have all the answers, and yet they turned around and they voted. The city council at this point, they voted to have the school out at Colley when they don't know what the bottom line figure is. And I've said to people many, many times, if I owned a construction company and you wanted to build an addition on your house, and I came to you, Jimmy, and I said, "Jim, I'm going to give you an estimate for what you want done." So I write up the estimate and I say it's going to cost between $40,000 and $70,000. So what are you going to say? You're going to probably say, "Well, Dave, which one is it? Is it 40? Is it 70? Is it 50? Oh, don't worry about it. Just sign all the paperwork. We'll worry about the finances later."
Right.
Obviously, you wouldn't do that. You know why you wouldn't do it? Because it's your money.
Right.
And yet the city council, if it was their situation, it was their money, they would have wanted to know what the bottom line is. And we need to respect the taxpayers' hard-working money that they bring in, and we needed to get the bottom line numbers. Because I'll tell you, every time I turn around, there's something different that takes place. I put out a flyer when we were talking about busing and how additional monies that's going to cost. And my figure, and I've talked to a number of different people, and it's been in articles, it's about $3 million. Now, I was ridiculed in social media and said it was only $1 million, and it wasn't $3. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And somebody responded and said, you're right, Mr. Conway is wrong with his numbers. It's not $3 million, it's $3.2 million. So it was kind of good to hear that. But what people don't realize, if it's $3 million or 3.2, if it's $3 million and we've got a bond of 30 years, you multiply 3 times 30, and that's the kind of monies that we're talking about. We're talking about $90 million over that period of time to do the busing. And that's not taking into consideration the increase, because you know yourself,
Right.
busing is one, it costs this much today. You know next year it's not going to go down, Jimmy, it's going to
Right.
go up.
Right.
So that's something that is saddled by on the shoulders of the taxpayer, which, you know, some people don't really think that's a big deal. I think it's a big deal. I really do.
I think it's a big deal, too.
Yeah, $3 million. So I think that one thing I have done is I've certainly have concentrated right from the very beginning. I said that I was for downtown for so many different reasons. We've gone over those reasons in the paper and the social media and so forth.
Right.
And it seems to me it's the most efficient and the fairest and cost-effective, and certainly the least disruptive. Take a look at this, and again, I was criticized with this because I sent out a piece to Pawtucketville, and I said, it's going to take about an hour and a half to 2 hours, the kids from Pawtucketville to get over to Cawley. And that's round trip,
Right.
an hour and a half. So naturally, my critics say, I don't know what you're talking about, an hour and it takes an hour and a half. It doesn't take, it's not going to take 45 minutes. I went for my car and it took me 35 minutes. Well, guess what? You weren't in a bus, you weren't stopping, you weren't picking students up, and you weren't going down side streets or wherever there are so many, as we know, so many different problems with getting from point A to point B using a bus. There's no doubt about it. And I say to my critics, if has anybody ever been in back of a school bus when they're trying to get to work or go someplace? It seems as though every time you turn around, they're stopping. Well, they've got to stop. They've got to open up the door. The kids have to come in. They have to wait for them to sit down. Then they have to start the bus up, and this process goes on and on and on. And you can't go on a highway.
Right.
You can't go on the highway. And I think that the traffic and the disruption up, and I've said this I don't know how many times, no matter what neighborhood you're talking about, it just can't handle it, except for the obvious neighborhood of downtown that we have right now. And that, remember, has been around a long, long time. And anybody that lives in that neighborhood, they picked it. They certainly picked it knowing that a high school was right there. And I think it's, when we're taking a look at the figures, it certainly is I think it's the fairest. Look at it this way, Jimmy. You've got 10% of the population, school population, lives up, 9 to 10% lives up in Belvedere. All right? So you've got 90% that has to get to all the way across the city. Now, when you go take Pawtucketville and you go out to the outer end, you're now on the border of Tingsboro.
Right.
Tingsboro and Lowell. You've got to go from the border of Tingsboro and Lowell to the border of Tewksbury and Lowell. Now, does that make much sense? Is it going to take that kind of time for our kids to be on the bus? Once again, I've had people say to me, Conway is wrong. It's going to take more time, not less time. So these are some of the things that, no, I think they're obviously backing me up.
Yeah.
But it's something that we certainly have to take a look at. And you as an educator, Jimmy, would certainly know that, and myself as a housemaster that dealt with kids coming in, absenteeism, tardies, what do you think that's going to do to that situation between absenteeism and tardies? I would certainly think it's going to go up. And if that goes up, it affects grades. Grades affects college admission. Academically, it just doesn't make much sense.
Well, I wrote a blog saying that the Cawley makes no sense, and I put in CENTS as the sense. And one of the reasons was because the Cawley site, not the Cawley site, the downtown site has existing buildings that have been built specifically for education. And even though they're in some disrepair, they've been built for education.
Well, Jimmy,
And what would happen if we took that? I'm sorry to say we take the dentist's office, but we're going to take something for
Right.
eminent domain anyway.
Right.
If we took the dentist's office and built a $336 million building for the high school on that site, as opposed to taking $336 million and putting it on a site in Belvedere.
Well, as I said to you before, it doesn't make much sense. I still think the figure is kind of high, to be quite frank with you, because it's something I'm not privy of every nook and cranny of that number, but the fact is, when we're talking about neighborhoods putting it in, I wouldn't want to see a new high school go into Pawtuckaville or the Highlands or the Acre or Centerville or Belvedere, because the infrastructure is just not there for it. The infrastructure has been built for how many years for the high school downtown? It's a completely different animal. And I'll tell you right now, that high school, and you went to, did you go to that high school?
Yes.
Okay. You went to the high school, I went to the high school, and I kiddingly said to someone the other day that if Russia, China, and North Korea attack us, I'm going to the 22 building on Kirk Street, because that is built like a fortress.
Right.
And when somebody said to me, that's a waste of money to put money into an older building, and why not go out and get a new building? Well, go down to Phillips Andover, go to Harvard University, go right here to the old it's the library right now for MCC. Those are beautiful buildings. They're absolutely gorgeous buildings. They were old buildings.
Right.
It's a matter of how they're done.
Did you read the book, the Laws of Massachusetts?
No, I did not.
It's very interesting, and it's partially about Lowell.
Yeah.
Obviously, but the Lowells were very famous for their philanthropy and their
Giving a lot of money out.
They gave a lot of money out.
Right.
And one thing that the chairman of the president of a Harvard College did, and he was a Lowell, one thing that he did was build 30 buildings. They're still there. They're still there. They're still being used.
Let me just say, one of the major problems that a municipality has, and I see it day in and day out, and we've seen it for years being down Low High, and that is what we call a PM system. Now, a PM system is what they say. What means is it's a preventative maintenance program.
Right.
We don't really have one. I don't care what anybody says, we don't have one. I went down to observe the Harvard Business School and their preventive maintenance program. It looked like I was walking into NASA. They had charts, they had graphs, they had people working there to make sure that everything was working correctly. And I said, wow, this must be expensive. And the gentleman said, yes, it is expensive, but it's a lot more expensive that if something breaks down and we have to replace it.
Right.
So he said, we've worked on this and we realized that this is the way to do it. Just like our car. If you don't change the oil in a car, what happens?
You have to replace it.
Well, eventually, you might get away with it for a year or two without changing the oil, but all of a sudden you're going to run into some major problems where if you spent $40 every, 3 times a year, you wouldn't have run into that problem. And too often municipalities, what they do is they wait until something breaks, and then they go to find the money, and in many cases they have to go back to the taxpayer.
Mm-hmm.
And the taxpayer is sick and tired of picking up the bill on mistakes that have been made. And we take a look at, look at the high school and look at the way that was unfolded. It just was not unfolded in a professional way. I mean, if this was out in the real world, what would happen?
Well,
They wouldn't. If you brought a project to the table and they asked 25 questions about that project, you better have 25 answers. And by the way, correct answers.
Right. Amazon built their headquarters for $50 million.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about a high school for $336 million.
Right.
It doesn't add up. The figures just don't add up, in my opinion.
Right. I think, first of all, certainly the location needs to be established. And again, I would certainly like to. I think it makes so much sense to keep it right downtown. It really does, for so many different reasons. And again, that might be something that you take a look at. Take a look at the bottom line, and before you vote on it, you want to make sure that you're getting a dollar for a dollar.
Right.
And too often, in municipalities and the state and the federal level, you're not getting the bang for your buck. And taxpayers have to work hard, and many of them aren't getting raises. Not like the city council gave themselves a 67% increase,
right.
And you never heard too much about that.
No, you never did.
Yeah, why? I don't know of anybody out there right now that's going to listen to this. How many people here, they can actually text me or email me if they got a 67% increase in their jobs over the last year?
I think you would have it would be sparse, and
I think it would be non-existent. And I know what the answer is. Oh, well, we haven't had a raise in a long time. We haven't worked. We work so hard. Well, guess what? That the taxpayer and the citizens of Lowell many of them haven't had an increase in their salaries in a long time. And guess what? They work very hard too.
yeah, we have to close. We're running out of time. But I really appreciated having you on. I appreciate your honesty.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, and I hope that the public will give me a chance with this. And I believe I'm number 2 on the ballot for the preliminary, and hopefully we can make some positive changes.
Okay. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
This has been Jim Peters with Peters Principles. You never know who you're going to have on Peters Principles, and today we had Dave Conway. So, see you next week. Thank you.